Welcome to the MyCitizenAgency channel. For many people, a European Union passport is not just a document, but an opportunity to live, work, study, and move freely throughout European countries. It provides access to a stable legal system, broader career prospects, and a new level of security for yourself and your family. And one of the most common questions people ask right from the start is, what is the fastest way to get an EU passport? It's important to be honest right away. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. The speed depends on your specific circumstances. For one person, the shortest route will be repatriation. For another, marriage to an EU citizen. And for a third, a pre-planned path through residency in the country. In this video, we'll explore which methods can truly be considered the fastest and why, when it comes to citizenship, not only the country but also your personal situation plays a decisive role. When discussing truly fast ways to obtain an EU passport, repatriation should be considered first. This category encompasses several situations that, for the client, essentially feel the same. We're talking about cases where citizenship can be obtained through descent, family ties, territorial affiliation, or by restoring a previously lost legal connection to a specific country. In other words, the basis is not relocation, not long-term residence abroad, and not the lengthy process of standard naturalization, but rather the fact that the person already has a specific connection to the state through family roots, ancestry, or territorial affiliation. This is precisely why repatriation often proves to be the shortest and most efficient route. A person does not need to start the entire process from scratch, obtain a residence permit, wait for many years, prove long-term integration, and only then apply for citizenship. If the basis exists, the task lies elsewhere proving this right, documenting it, and completing the established legal procedure. In many situations, this is precisely what allows for a significantly shorter path to a European passport. Essentially, it is not about creating a new basis, but about realizing an already existing opportunity that was previously not formalized or brought to a legal conclusion. But here it is very important not to base expectations solely on assumptions. Many people believe that family stories, a similar surname, relatives' recollections, or a general understanding that there were European roots in the family are sufficient to start the process. In practice, this is not enough. Government agencies evaluate evidence, not assumptions. What matters are archival documents, civil registry records, information about relatives, and documents regarding birth, marriage, name changes, residence, and civil status, as well as the entire legally structured chain of evidence that allows the basis to be confirmed without gaps or contradictions. It is precisely at this stage that it becomes clear how promising a particular case is. Sometimes family history does indeed open a fast track to EU citizenship, but without high-quality preparation of documents, this right remains merely a possibility. And sometimes, conversely, a person does not even suspect that their situation qualifies for repatriation until a detailed analysis of the family and documents is conducted. Therefore, repatriation can indeed be the fastest route to an EU passport, but only under one important condition. If the situation is correctly assessed from the outset, evidence is found, the appropriate legal basis is determined, and the case itself is prepared professionally and consistently. It is only then that this path becomes not only fast, but also truly reliable. If there are no grounds for repatriation, the next option is naturalization through residency. At first glance, this path does indeed seem longer, and in the traditional sense, that is indeed the case. Unlike repatriation, where a person already has an initial basis related to their origin or family history, here citizenship is acquired gradually through lawful residence in the country, compliance with established requirements, and consistent completion of all stages. But even in this scenario, the speed depends not only on the law, but also on how wisely the country is chosen and how correctly the entire path is structured from the very beginning. It is important to understand, not every move leads to EU citizenship equally quickly. In some countries, the procedure is more straightforward and predictable. In others, the requirements are significantly stricter, the timelines are longer, and the process itself is more complex in terms of confirming status, integration, and fulfilling all conditions. Therefore, what matters is not simply the fact of moving to Europe, but choosing the specific path to legalization that will actually lead to citizenship in the long run, rather than leaving a person in temporary residence status for an extended period without a clear future. This is precisely where many people make a mistake. People often choose a country based on popularity, relying on stories from acquaintances, general advice from the internet, or promises that sound appealing but do not take their personal situation into account. In practice, however, the actual time it takes to obtain citizenship depends on a number of factors. The basis on which the residence permit is issued, how stable that status is, how quickly one can transition to permanent residency, what requirements apply to the length of stay in the country, whether language proficiency is required, how integration into society is demonstrated, and what requirements exist regarding income, tax status, and compliance with immigration laws. In addition, it is important to consider how stable the legal system itself is. Even if the formal naturalization timeline in one country appears more attractive, in practice the procedure may be more bureaucratic, less predictable, and accompanied by additional requirements that significantly slow down the process. This is precisely why one must evaluate not only the stated timelines, but the entire path from the initial status to the moment when the actual right to apply for citizenship arises. At the same time, naturalization through residency should not be viewed as an overly long or inherently disadvantageous path. If the path is chosen correctly from the very beginning, this option can be quite rational, straightforward, and legally sound. This is especially true in cases where a person has no grounds for repatriation, but has the opportunity to develop a coherent strategy for relocation and subsequent acquisition of citizenship. In other words, the key factor here is not only the time required by law, but also the quality of the strategy. The more precisely the route is chosen at the start, the fewer unnecessary steps, mistakes, changes in grounds, and wasted time there will be later on. And that is precisely why even naturalization can become a clear and effective path to a European passport, if approached not haphazardly, but professionally and consistently. Another route that in some cases can indeed shorten the timeline is marriage to an EU citizen, but here it is important to set the right priorities from the start. Marriage in and of itself does not mean automatic receipt of a passport and does not grant citizenship immediately after the marriage is registered. This is not a quick result upon the fact of marriage, but a separate legal path that, in a number of European countries, can create more favorable conditions for obtaining citizenship in the future. That is precisely why this option should be viewed not as an exception to the rules, but as one form of simplified naturalization. For the spouse of a citizen, there may indeed be more lenient timeframes, a shorter residency period, clearer conditions for obtaining citizenship, or other procedural advantages compared to the standard procedure. However, specific rules always depend on the legislation of the particular country. In other words, in this case, marriage may not replace the path to citizenship itself, but it can make it shorter and more straightforward. For an individual, this means that, provided all conditions are met, they can obtain a European passport faster than an applicant undergoing standard naturalization without a family-based basis. However, it is particularly important to understand that states treat such cases with heightened scrutiny. Competent authorities always assess not only the mere fact of marriage, but also the authenticity of the relationship. They verify cohabitation, shared daily life, compliance with immigration rules, the duration of the relationship, the availability of supporting documents, and the overall coherence of the family history. In many cases, attention is also paid to how consistently the person is integrating into the country's society, how stable their status is, and whether all formal legal requirements are being met. Therefore, this route works only when everything is done legally, transparently, and is documented. If the relationship is genuine, the status is properly documented, and the procedure itself is handled correctly, marriage to an EU citizen can indeed serve as a basis for obtaining citizenship more quickly. However, it is important to approach this path with a realistic perspective. Its advantage lies not in waiving legal requirements, but in the fact that in certain cases, it allows for a shorter path to citizenship. And that is precisely why accuracy in documentation, compliance with all procedures, and proper legal support at every stage are particularly important here. As a result, marriage to an EU citizen can be a very real and faster path to a European passport, but only if this basis is not a mere formality, but a genuine, confirmed and legally registered family relationship. To sum up, in most cases, the fastest way to obtain an EU passport is repatriation, provided you actually have the appropriate grounds. It is precisely this route that most often allows you to save time, because it is based not on long-term residence in the country or on gradually going through the standard naturalization process, but on an existing connection to the state through ancestry, family lineage, or family history. If such grounds can be documented, the path to citizenship often turns out to be significantly shorter and clearer. If, however, there are no grounds for repatriation, then the most realistic option becomes a well-planned route through residency and subsequent naturalization. Yes, this path usually takes more time, but here too the final timeline largely depends on how well the country was chosen, how securely the status was established, and how consistently the entire strategy was built from the very beginning. In such a situation, what matters is not only the move itself, but also whether the chosen basis leads to citizenship in the foreseeable future. In some cases, marriage to a citizen of a European country can also shorten the time frame, but it is important to understand this correctly, not as an automatic way to obtain a passport, but as a legal basis that, in some countries, allows for shorter processing times or simplified conditions for obtaining citizenship compared to the standard procedure. This can also be a faster route, but only if all requirements are met and the situation itself is documented and appears legally sound. Therefore, the main question should not be which country grants a passport the fastest. Such an approach oversimplifies the reality and often leads a person away from the truly suitable solution. It is much more appropriate to frame the question differently. Which path will be the fastest specifically in my situation? Because the speed of the citizenship process depends not only on the country, but also on your grounds, documents, family history, and the strategy that can be tailored specifically for you. For this very reason, the path to an EU passport should be evaluated not based on general promises or universal advice, but through a personalized analysis. In some cases, repatriation will indeed be the shortest route. In others, it will be gradual naturalization through residency. And sometimes, a family-based route through marriage will prove more advantageous. The sooner this becomes clear, the fewer unnecessary steps, mistakes, and wasted time on unsuitable options there will be. The most common mistake is looking for a quick fix without considering your specific circumstances. At first glance, many people think the main thing is to find a country where citizenship can be obtained faster or to choose the option most frequently discussed online. But in practice, this approach often proves to be wrong. When it comes to obtaining an EU passport, speed depends not on a nice general answer, but on what opportunities are available specifically to you and how clearly they are defined from the very beginning. It is precisely because of the lack of such analysis that people often waste months and sometimes even years. They take the longer route, even though a shorter and more logical path might have existed in their situation. Some people begin the relocation process, secure residency, adapt to the new country, and invest time and resources, only to discover later that their family history could have provided grounds for repatriation. Others submit documents through the wrong procedure because they relied on general information rather than their specific situation. Others do not consider their family lineage as a legal basis at all and miss a real opportunity to shorten the path to citizenship. The problem is that a mistake at the start almost always leads to further delays. If the wrong path is chosen, one subsequently has to change strategy, gather additional documents, correct inaccuracies, re-establish grounds, or return to stages that step could have been handled differently from the start. As a result, a person loses not only time but also confidence in the process, because instead of a clear path toward the goal, they face unnecessary steps and delayed decisions. Therefore, when it comes to citizenship, speed does not begin with filing an application or choosing a country based on someone else's advice. Speed begins with a proper assessment of your options. First, you need to understand whether there are grounds for repatriation, whether you can use family ties, whether there is a right to a shorter path, or whether naturalization through residency is truly the best option. Only after that does it make sense to map out a specific route. The sooner you understand the basis on which you can proceed, the fewer unnecessary steps there will be in the process. This means a reduced risk of errors, rejections, wasted time, and taking a longer route when a shorter, more efficient option was available from the start. That is precisely why a competent start in such matters is already part of achieving a quick result. Because the EU passport is obtained faster, not by the first person to submit documents, but by the one who chose the right basis and the right strategy from the very beginning. An EU passport is not just a status. It is freedom of movement, new career and educational opportunities, stability and confidence in the future for you and your family. And if you want to get there as quickly as possible, you shouldn't start by looking for a one-size-fits-all solution, but by understanding which basis is truly right for you. Because the fast track isn't about promises or grand statements. The fast track is about a legal basis, properly prepared documents, and a professionally crafted strategy. If you want to understand whether you are eligible for repatriation or which route to an EU passport will be the shortest in your specific case, submit a request for a free consultation via the link in the description. We will review your situation, create your personalized immigration plan, and prepare a complete set of documents for successfully obtaining citizenship in one of the EU countries. We work on a one-on-one basis, taking into account your goals, your lifestyle, and your specific situation. Thank you for watching this video. If you're interested in this topic, subscribe to the channel and feel free to ask questions in the comments. We regularly publish program reviews, answer frequently asked questions, and share important news about immigration law and life in the EU. Your journey to Europe begins with the first step. My Citizen Agency is here for you every step of the way.